Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Enablement Brew podcast. I'm Carly Lehner.
And I'm Malvina and we're so excited you're joining us for yet another episode. And we're joined by a guest. So today we have Aaron Evans. He's joining us to talk about the topic of coaching. But before we dive in, Aaron, do you want to introduce yourself?
I'd love to, but I'd also like to start by thanking you both for having me on. Big fan of both of yours. Obviously, I've been following you on LinkedIn and know about your careers and the wonderful stuff you're doing for our community. So it's a real pleasure to be here. So my name is Aaron Evans. I work for an organisation called Flow State. I'll probably start by giving you a brief synopsis of my time in enablement. So I've been in enablement for almost 15 years now. In fact, before it was even called enablement, actually. Basically, I've worked for a combination of really large sort of oil tanker multi-corporation organizations that take a lifetime to show any change or make any decisions within their organization, all the way through to small, nimble startups, scale-ups, pre-IPO, post-IPO businesses. Always in the enablement function or training, development, coaching, not L&D, just to be really clear. That's a dirty word for me as far as I'm concerned when it comes to enablement. But then about 2.5 years ago, I started my own company, which is Flow State. Now, we're a sales transformation business. We work with enablement functions to either give them extra capacity to accelerate their roadmap or strategic guidance on their roadmap. Also expertise as well. So we get plugged into the business to help them do the things they can't do, essentially. I'm deeply passionate about sales enablement, deeply passionate about sales. I think that there's some big mistakes being made in sales enablement at the moment. And I think there's some big mistakes being made in sales management at the moment. So I'm really excited to pick through the bones of that carcass with you ladies today.
You know, when you have a celebrity crush, I have a celebrity crush on your LinkedIn content. I'm not going to lie.
Absolutely. Aaron always has top-notch content.
I really appreciate it. You're making me blush. For those that are listening and not watching, I'm blushing when I hear these ladies that give me such wonderful compliments. But thank you very much indeed. I appreciate it. There's no nice way of responding to that. I have a celebrity crush on your content, but hopefully I get it masterfully.
Yeah, so if you're listening and don't follow Aaron, you absolutely have to. Always post some really good stuff. But Aaron, as is tradition on the Enablement Brew, what is in your mug?
Well, I've made possibly the most disgusting cup of coffee known to mankind, actually. I'm a vegan, which I'm surprised I've not told you already, because that's part of being a vegan. You just need to obviously posture your moral platitudes immediately when you meet someone. So I've run out of soy milk and I've had to use almond milk as well, which has been like almost like a reserve emergency milk in our cupboard. And it's made possibly the most disgusting cup of coffee ever known to man. So I've had to mask it with tons of sugar as well. So I'm going to be very buoyed and excited and full of pep during the course of this meeting as the sugar obviously hits my system.
Healthy vegan.
Yeah, if there is such a thing.
Carly?
I have some tea. And it's just an English breakfast tea with some oat milk, no sugar. We were talking before the episode that I'm basically British now that I've been here 5 years. And yes, I have tea, which is a very British thing. So yeah.
You've got to stop calling it English breakfast tea and you've got to just start calling it tea.
Yeah. For the Americans who are listening, I want to clarify. It is not Yorkshire Gold. It is Tea Pigs. So yeah. Yeah. To be specific. Malvina, what about you?
So I have a super large mug this morning because my little one is actually ill at home today. So I've had, a full 9 hours sleep, slept really well, woke up feeling very refreshed, not. So yes, it's coffee with oat milk. And I have a new favorite, which is Khalifa oat milk.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Khalifa Farms. Yeah, good stuff.
Very nice.
So good.
Nice.
All right. So should we dive into the topic? This is an exciting one, and I'm excited to actually dive into it because I think what we think the reality is actually very different to what is actually happening. And that is around coaching, right? And there has been loads of reports out there saying that sellers want to receive coaching. They want to be coached by their managers, but actually that isn't happening. And our definition, or the definition of many of what coaching actually is really far from what it should be. So to open it up, Aaron, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, this is a large part of what my organization does. We've got a strong coaching arm to our business. So we have to go into organizations and first of all, unpick the definition of coaching for organizations, because there's a common trend, as you've alluded to, of people conflating coaching and training, but actually maybe not doing any coaching and basically doing training. So we spend a lot of time educating people on the value of coaching, why it's so important to organizations, why it's so important to learning and growth and development. And then we go through a quite long drawn out process of giving people the skill, the competency, and also actually the cadence, because a lot of the time it's the first thing to go when people are busy or under pressure is that they part coaching and they revert back to kind of native behaviors. So yeah, coaching is incredibly important. Now, I think the biggest disconnect is people understanding what coaching is. Now, fundamentally, it's basically using a series of guided questions to help people come up with answers themselves. Now, if you read any of the literature on this, and I've been really fortunate, I've interviewed people like Miles Downey, who is like the godfather of coaching, and all of his books are phenomenal when it comes to both explaining coaching, but also giving practical takeaways and tips on why coaching, how you can coach and why it's so important. So what you're fundamentally doing is that you're giving someone a thought process to deal with problems. So let me give you a really simple example of this, is that, Malvina, if you came to me and said, Aaron, can I borrow your scissors, as an example, the kind of expedient manager in us often goes, yeah, they're in the third drawer down in the kitchen. And then you go and you use the scissors and you put them back, but you've learned nothing in that process. Whereas if I was to ask you some guided questions and say, well, you can, but where would you keep your scissors in your house? And you're like, well, obviously in the kitchen. Okay, whereabouts in the kitchen would you keep them? Probably in the drawers. Which drawer? Well, I have my cutlery in the top drawer, I have my tea towel in the second drawer, and then I have my scissors in the third drawer done. Okay, go and have a look and see where they are. And you've learned something in that process. But where it becomes really interesting is you've now come up with a framework for solving problems. So if you wanted to go and now borrow my hairdryer, you wouldn't come to me and go, where's your hairdryer? You'd know what questions to ask yourself to go and solve that particular problem. Apologies, there's a real nightmare going on in the background. I don't know if you can hear it, but my dog walker's just arrived to pick up my dog. My dog's got very excited because I think she prefers the dog walker to us. So
I know how it is, Aaron. Don't worry.
I mean, they're very fickle beings, I have to say.
Yeah.
So the point here is what the manager's doing is they're giving a framework for problem solving and a framework for thought. Now, the irony of this is that in the long run, it saves the manager an absolute ton of time. But that initial investment is often timely, so time intensive, clumsy, uncomfortable. And that's where often they struggle to do it. But look, just to sort of finish this rant off, if you will, I'm going to give you two statistics that should keep to front of mind whenever we're in a business and we're thinking about coaching, particularly if you're at the top of an organization. 22% of retention, 22% of learning is retained through training. So if you're training someone, kind of classic chalk and talk, only 22% of it is actually going to stick into their brain. And that diminishes over time. When you add coaching into the mix, that retention jumps up to 88%. This is the classic Herman Ebbinghaus forgetting curve, right? The other statistic, which I think is far more meaningful, is that for every dollar spent on coaching, there's a $7.90 return on that coaching. Other than a casino, I can't think of anywhere else where you can get that kind of return on investment or odds. So it's phenomenally important, criminally underused in organizations, and it's also a competency that managers have actually lost over time as well.
Do you think it's because managers aren't taught how to coach, right? I think the challenge that I've been hearing is, well, I've never received coaching in my career, so I'm not necessarily sure how it should look like when I'm meant to be coaching someone, right? And I feel like there's a gap between what the expectation is, but what the reality actually looks like, right? And a lot of these managers, they're like, well, I've never really received coaching in my corporate career. I don't really know what it should look like. Like, is it just a catch up? You know, is coaching when they come to me and they need something and I maybe give them the answer or I tell them where to find it? You know, is coaching meant to be this 1 hour session, right? Where we sit down and we say, this is our coaching session for the week.
Well, but by virtue of someone asking that question, it often means that they've not been coached. Here's the thing, right? When a manager comes to me and says, what is coaching? How does it work? Or even when they ask that question to the organization, it actually leads to a bigger problem because it demonstrates that they're not being coached, right? So by virtue of them asking that question, it often shows that no one's modeling that behavior within their organization. But I actually think there's a broader problem. And I'm guessing that you guys notice this in your practices as well, is that The role of a sales manager is the most ripe for disruption out of any part of the sales organization at the moment. It's become basically like that junk drawer in your kitchen. Sorry to keep using drawers as an analogy, but that one where you put everything in there, right? There's like skewers from when you have barbecue 6 months ago. There's like Christmas crackers in there. There's all the crap that you don't want. You just put it into this one drawer. Well, that's what the sales manager role has become. 71% of managers don't receive any formal training before they go into the role. The average tenure of a sales manager is 19 months. Within SaaS, it's 11 months. There's a big problem going on with sales management at the moment, and I think there's several reasons for that. Number one is the job they're being asked to do is not the job of what a sales manager is. They're not being asked to focus on their team and improve their team every day. They're not being given the competencies to go and do the core function of their role. They're not prioritizing time, because like time's irrelevant to managers anymore. They don't think about it in time. They think about it in task. And the task, everything is urgent. It needs to be done today, and it's coming from above them. They're not aligned strategically to the organization on the whole. Like obviously there are edge cases where businesses are doing this really well. They often have competing objectives and competing priorities as well. So for me, I speak to managers and I've got deep sympathy for managers. But when we focus in on the actual topic of coaching, it becomes really interesting. They're not being trained how to coach. They're not being given it as an important area they should be focusing on with their team. On top of that, outside of competency and obviously the focus, there's no one modeling the right behavior of coaching, because if you go further and further up the organization, coaching often gets more and more diluted. When was the last time a CEO sat down and genuinely coached their CFO or second in command or whatever it is? They just don't do it. And again, I don't blame them for not doing it, because their role is very, very different. Like they're often making big decisions quickly. They're very thinking about things from a very high level. They're often more strategic. But we've got to create a language of coaching, not a culture of coaching. People talk about a culture of coaching. Well, I don't know if I fully agree with that, because coaching is a skill, and it's like learning a language, right? So the more that we turn it into a language within an organization, the more likely it is to stick. It's not a cultural thing. It's a skill. So what do I mean by that? Well, I'm sorry, apologies if I'm going off on a big rant, but obviously I thought very, very deeply about coaching for many, many years. And coaching is one of the very few skills that can actually be taken on osmotically or osmatically in an organization. So if I coach you for long enough, I've now created a language in the way that we speak. And then something really interesting happens. Another rep will come and talk to you, and you'll naturally start coaching them because you've learned that language. I often liken it to like, you see these people who've been caught smuggling like drugs into Indonesia, and then they get put into an Indonesian jail. Within 3 months, they can speak perfect Indonesian, because they've just had to adopt the language, because that's the only thing that's around them. So it's not a cultural thing. It's a skill and a language thing. And we have to create a language of coaching. And that means that we've just got to do it all the time, constantly with everyone. And then all of a sudden, everyone adopts that language as well. A bit of a rant, apologies, but hopefully I've got the points across.
This is good. I mean, this is why we're having this conversation. So, I've been to a couple conferences in the last few weeks, and coaching is a hot topic in enablement right now. And one of the things that, like Malvina kind of said earlier, is that there's tons of reports, tons of data around that say that reps want to be coached and they're not receiving coaching. And then you ask the managers, how much time do you spend coaching? And they say they're coaching all the time, but they actually are confusing coaching with their weekly one-on-ones and pipeline and deal reviews. So how do you kind of bridge that gap of understanding of what you're doing isn't coaching, and this is actually what is coaching instead? Like there's that in the whole like behavioral change process, like that's pretty early on, and they're not going to change if they don't think what they're doing is coaching.
Well, what you've got to train managers on is that coaching isn't the event. So just because it's a deal review, you can still have a deal review, but the language you use is coaching. So let's think about it like this, right? If you can distill coaching down into its simplest format, it's basically three things, right? It's guided questioning, it's active listening in the clinical term of active listening, so understanding, remembering, and responding. and then it's setting for, like, real clear action points that you mutually agree, and you flip the accountability onto the person who's being coached. So why can't you do that in a deal review? Why can't you do that when someone comes and asks you a question? Why can't you do that in a pipeline review? Why can't you do that in a PDP or a PIP? Whatever it is you're doing, you just got to change the language, not the event. So people often turn around and go, right, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to build out a coaching like cadence. So on Monday, I'm going to coach this guy. On Tuesday, I'm going to coach this girl. And it's like, no. Just keep doing what you're doing, but change the language you're using as opposed to the event. So it's not a moment in time. It's, again, I can't think of a clearer way to express it. It's the language that you're using in those moments in time that make it a coaching moment. So when you distill it down, there's basically 4 coaching opportunities a sales manager has. The first one is what we call informal one-on-one, right? So, Carly, you come up to me at my desk. I'm busy, like, writing an email, and you come up to me and go, hey, I'm just about to send a proposal out to XYZ. What do you think I should put as the subject line? Okay, so now I've got an opportunity to coach you. Yeah. And that's informal coaching. We've not put it in a calendar somewhere. It's at desk coaching, right? But then you've got one-on-one formal coaching, which is where we've got time in the diary where we sit down and we speak the language of coaching. That could be a pipeline review, deal review, etc., etc. Then we've got group formal coaching, which is we all go into a room together as a team. We sit down and we like dissect the deal. We might listen to a call. We might, I don't know, run a pipe review, score a deal, whatever it is. We've now got a group opportunity to coach, right? And then we've got informal group coaching, which might be we hear 2 or 3 people having a conversation about a particular subject. You can now insert yourself and use that as a coaching opportunity. So what we're always trying to ask managers to recognize is that you've got these 4 kind of quadrants where you can coach. You're probably doing all of these, but you're just not using the coaching practices to do precisely those things. So it's actually a bit of a reframe of the language as opposed to a reframe of the things you need to do, because they're probably doing all those things. They're just not using it as coaching opportunities.
And that feels like an easier like transition than, oh, okay, so my deal reviews are just like one-on-ones and I have to put in this separate time to coach. I think it's an easier switch to just be like, oh, I can still do all the things that I'm already doing today. I just need to change the language, and I need to learn this language. And that's something that enablement can help with over time, right?
Yeah, definitely, 100%. The challenge comes from actual self-awareness of the opportunity, though, right? So let's look at that first example I gave you of informal one-on-one coaching. I'm at my desk sending an email, and you come over and interrupt my day. What's the easy, expedient thing for me to do when you ask me a question? Give you the answer.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing, is that the thing you actually have to train in the manager is recognizing when that opportunity comes about, and to be able to take a breath and go, right, I'm now going to choose to use this as a coaching opportunity. That's the hard part, is getting the manager to really, really become self-aware and analyze their own behavior. They're probably good at the kind of formal stuff where it's locked in the diary and then they can remind themselves that they need to do it. Where I see enablement playing a big part in this is actually not just training people how to coach, which is a fundamental competency that every manager should have, but also constantly reminding the manager of the coaching opportunities and making it into a language. So, in the same way that if you and I were to learn Spanish today, the best way of doing it is actually to sit down and, listen to someone else speak Spanish. So we've got an opportunity to grab these managers and coach them on their coaching, which is starting to sound really, really meta. But what we're doing is that we're sharpening the skill for the manager. And on top of that, we're reinforcing the behavior and turning it into a conscious competence as opposed to an unconscious incompetence or an unconscious competence. That's what we have to keep reminding the manager of, which is hard, because I don't know about you guys, but in the last organization I worked in as a full-time employee, I probably had 60 managers, and the enablement function is just going to get stretched. But the power of it and the return on investment and the outcomes it can drive is phenomenal.
Where do you think this becomes a challenge? And, we had conversations about this in the past, right? It's usually top performing AEs that are promoted to sales manager roles within organizations, right? If I'm a top performing AE and now I'm a manager and I have a team of 5 AEs, it's like, I need to make my mark, right? I need to make sure that they're the best team, that they're hitting their numbers. And for that newly promoted sales manager, oftentimes the easiest thing is, what should you put in that, proposal subject line? This is what you should put. How
Yeah.
should I draft this email? Write this, because you're leaning towards what you know has worked for you. And it's very easy for you to just give the answers,
Mm-hmm.
right? Do you see this as a trend with top performing AEs who are promoted to sales managers? That for them actually to adopt that coaching mindset is a lot more difficult.
Yeah, on the whole, yeah, and I've noticed it throughout my 20-year career. I've noticed that from when I first got into B2B all the way through to today. It's not a trend that's going away, although it should go away, because there's several factors in play here, which is I've got to make a confession. My brother is like this. He's a lot older than me. He's 11 years older than me, and he's a high performing salesperson, not a great manager for that reason. Is that his attitude towards his team is probably, if something's going bad, I'll do it myself, which is the worst way to manage because no one
Yep.
learns anything, right? Or if it's I need to train someone something, he gets frustrated because they're not as good as him. So he's got all of the traits of a terrible manager, but a brilliant salesperson. And I always say to organizations, think very carefully about who you put into the management position because it's probably not your top performer. It may even be a low performer because what you're looking for is the competencies that a manager needs to be successful. And often those people aren't particularly motivated by money. They're often motivated by helping people. That's often the thing, right? So don't look at performance, look at motivation. I think Simon Sinek did a brilliant talk on this about how they do it in basically in the army or in combat roles. Is that it's very rarely the top performer is that people pick to want to be by their side. It's actually the person who wants to help and assist and make the team better is the person that they want to go into battle with. And I always use the analogy of it's like saying to a plumber, God, you've been such a brilliant plumber, we're now going to make you a chef. It's like, well, they're two completely different competencies, but we do that with salespeople all the time. You've been so good at selling, we're now going to make you a manager, which is completely different competency, right?
Yeah.
So what I always ask businesses to do is that if you've got a robust competency framework that has detailed what the competencies are to be a successful manager or leader, start spotting those in your current sales organization, ring fence those people and nurture those competencies. Because what you've got is your next generational cohort of managers. And it's very, very, very rarely the top performer. And not just that, if you think about it logically, you're about to take out a massive revenue hole when you take your top performer and put them into a management position. And you're also about to frustrate them because it's not the role really that they're motivated by.
Mm.
So it makes no sense to me. And I think it's something that's completely unique to sales. I've not seen it across any other industry as well.
But have you ever heard a story like, yes, I was the, bottom of my performance, right? I was really not performing very well, but then I was promoted to manager. Said no one ever,
Well,
right?
yes and no. I think when you look at more mature organizations, one of the things they've got is they have a real deep understanding of what a management competency is. Now, if I was to grab your average SaaS business now and grab anyone sales leader and say, list for me the 10 competencies that you look for in a manager, they'd be like, motivates, like, yeah, great. What else? What else do they need? Now, these organizations are really good at picking people very, very early and then basically enhancing those competencies over a year, right? So you might be literally over a year, one course every month of really nurturing those competencies. I have worked at organizations where the top performer and sometimes even middling to low performers have been promoted into management role because they have the competency and the motivation to do the job right. And there's a recognition that they're two very different jobs as well. The challenge comes from when the team respects the manager because they're a middling performer. But often that is changed very quickly when they realize that they're really focused on helping the team achieve its objectives and goals and growing the individuals as well. But it is hard. I'll give you that, Malvina. It is hard.
One of the things that I notice, and I kind of realized this all throughout my enablement career when, enablement, we're always tasked to replicate our top performers and how can we create programs to make all of our salespeople like our top performers. And when I interview top performers and I ask them hey, how did you uncover this 6-figure deal or this 7-figure deal? They're like, I don't know, I just had a meeting with my client and had a conversation with them, and what do you know, $1 million deal. They generally don't know what makes them successful. A lot of times they're like, hey, I'm just like a naturally great salesperson. Or to me, this seems like common sense to send a really detailed like follow-up email. And like the things that they do feels like second nature to them. And so when they have a team, to your point earlier, Erin, when they have a team who doesn't do these things, it's hard for them to kind of figure out like, hey, why aren't they just doing what I would do
Mm.
naturally? Why is it so difficult for someone to basically do what I do? And they have a hard time articulating that back to their team. Like they would have a hard time articulating it to me in enablement.
Yeah.
And so um I always find it super interesting then when we put these people into management roles, because if they have a hard time kind of figuring out what makes them really good, it's going to be really hard to develop a team under
Yeah.
them to perform as well as they can.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I've really developed my thinking on this over the last year or so. In fact, I was having a conversation with Dr. Howard Dover at UT Dallas literally about 2 or 3 nights ago. And he's obviously written a book called The Sales Innovation Paradox, and he speaks so eloquently about this particular problem. And I've sort of changed my perception on this, is that we used to call those salespeople lone wolves,
Yeah.
but actually the language he uses is disruptors. Now, this is super interesting for me from an enablement point of view, is that there's conflicting objectives for the enablement function and the disruptor. The enablement function is trying to centralize, standardize, scale, behavior, process, competency, all those things. The lone wolf has found a way to be very successful outside of those. So the smart thing to do is backwards engineer what the disruptor is doing. So I keep using the term lone wolf, what the disruptor is doing, and then inform the enablement function to build out those behaviors, right? Now, this is why those lone wolves get frustrated by enablement, is because they're trying to bring them in line with something they know doesn't work for them. And it's really, really hard, and it pisses them off, to be perfectly honest with you. And they leave. That's what often happens is they want to be left alone to go and be successful. And they're often high performers as well. What we should actually be doing is trying to learn, as you say, what they do. But I think the problem we talk about with these outliers is we talk about task. So what is it that you're doing? Really, we should be talking about competency. So what I would do, I would literally give them a list of 100 competencies over an hour and say, here's the competency, here's the definition of the competency. I just want you to do me a favor. I want you to score yourself on these competencies. So what you start finding is it's not task, it's competency. And then when they score themselves on those competencies, you get the manager to validate that and go, right, they say they're doing these things. Can you just validate the scoring on these competencies? And what you've now got is almost a warning flag of the competencies that they have that you might not be training or coaching from an enablement point of view. And we know they're valuable because they're delivering success for this disruptor. Models are going to change soon. Like there's a big iceberg in the distance. Models are going to change, like because the buyer is dictating this. The buyer's getting pissed off with the way that we're selling to them. This is being articulated in almost every report, every bit of research, every essay that's being written at the moment. So enablement's got to learn very quickly, what are the top performers doing? How can I backwards engineer it to then scale it? Not try and scale what I'm trying to do onto top performers, actually backwards engineer the top performer. And it's a very interesting task when you go through it, because there's competencies on there that you weren't even thinking about that are actually really, really valuable, because they're valuable in the buyer's eyes, not in the enablement function's eyes.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Super interesting. Yeah.
So deep.
Well, that's why I'm here, right?
I love that. I love that, right? It's a different perspective. I think for me, just hearing you talk about coaching is not the action, it's not the task, it's not the hour, it's just the language that you use. Oh my gosh, everyone should hear this, right? Because it does make you realize that those small interactions that you have with your sellers, those could be amazing, incredible opportunities, right? But you need to have that awareness and actually hit the pause button, slow down to acknowledge that this is a great opportunity for you to coach someone.
Yeah.
I think in tech sales and lots of companies out there, right? Things move so quickly. I see this happening for me all the time. I'm always in this go, 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 next thing. What's the next thing? What's the next thing? And it's very difficult for me even to say, Malvina, just slow down, maybe have a chat with your team members about this, right? Get their thoughts, get their perspective, find out what they would do.
Yeah.
Because I'm constantly in this go, go, go mindset. And I don't know if it's the times that we're living in, if it's like the culture, it's a combination of all those things, but we are very much in quick task, get it done, next thing.
I think I know what the problem is. It's not time, it's the funding model. So you got to follow the money, and you've got to go back to the root cause. When I work with traditional markets, yeah, you find something really interesting is that the average tenure of a salesperson there is like 10 to 15 years. The average tenure of a sales manager there is like 20 years. They're being asked to grow 10% every year, 5% every year, and it's quite comfortable. It's like, yeah, we can achieve our goals. They've got deep relationships with their customers. Their brand is incredible. When you go into tech, it's like, well, we're VC funded. We've got to grow by 50% this year. It's not optional. It's like you're basically telling the manager, you've got to build the plane as you're jumping off, but you also need to gain altitude at the same time. It's like, it's not achievable. You can never come off the hamster wheel. It's the funding model that's the problem. It's not, that's simply what it is. VC and private equity are investing in 10 SaaS companies to hope that one of them is, basically explodes. So what then happens is that there is this never-ending hamster wheel of 50% growth, 50% growth, 50%, 50%. It's not attainable. You've got to come up for air at some point. And this is why you see these implosions in SaaS companies. Like, you just see it. It's like pre-IPO, Series C and a half, Series D. Often they have this massive implosion because they've not built the foundations to actually sustainably grow, both through people, through practice, through process, and through product as well. And then they've got to go into a quarterly meeting with the investors and talk about how they've not grown. And it's just too much pressure on everyone.
Yeah.
They were smart and sensible, and they said, like, 15-20% growth is more than enough. It's like, okay, because down the road in 6-7 years, we're going to have an explosion. Then you get there. But I feel real sympathy for SaaS companies and SaaS leaders, the co-founders and founders of these businesses, because they're basically writing checks, signing their soul away to so much pressure on people. It's really, really hard. Go and look at traditional markets. They're not doing it. The worrying thing for me is that the traditional markets are now going, wow, those SaaS companies are growing by 50%. Why don't we adopt their model? And it's like, no. You are the SaaS 2.0. You are the maturity curve. You're now going backwards by doing that, right? Because SaaS companies eventually get there. Like, you look at Salesforce, it's now like, it's what you'd call a traditional market model, right? It's like, yeah, we're happy to grow a little bit every single year. And, we're now on the stock market, et cetera, et cetera. So it's pretty scary, actually. Pretty scary.
Prior to, moving away into the startup world, I mean, I was in financial services for 10 and a half years. Like, I have colleagues who are there for 15 years. My manager was there for 18 years, right? And then when I moved over to the startup world, I realized, oh my gosh, people change after 2 years. Like, that's a thing. Like, we had lifers, people who joined, stayed, and, never left, right? And never looked elsewhere. And you're right. Like, the pace was quick, but not as quick as what we see, to your point, in SaaS businesses in the tech space.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of self-perpetuating as well, because what happens is that there's a new Series A born every day. So what do? Well, let's go and get the expertise of these Series B and Series C models, and we'll hire a manager in, and we'll hire some sales reps in, and then we get this self-perpetuating model. And I know this pisses people off a lot when I say this, but SaaS has kind of poisoned the well of selling. It's created a model that is not buyer-centric, and the buyer hates it. Like, the buyer, there's a big buyer backlash going on at the moment. Like, I think about it, right? If I'm a buyer of your product and I get a call from an SDR, they convince me to sit a demo, and then an AE sits the demo, and then a value engineer comes on to show me the value. They'll decide to buy it, and then I get handed over to onboarding, then I get handed over to CS, and I've also got an account manager. It's like, how the hell am I supposed to build a deep relationship with this company and the people servicing me? Like, we're pissing the buyer off every single day. And there's a big backlash that started and is going to get a lot worse. And it's all driven out in the statistics of buyer behavior at the moment.
Yeah. Super interesting. So, Aaron, as our final question for the episode, if we have managers on the podcast listening in, what what advice would you give them on getting started to learn the coaching language, especially like if they don't have an enablement team, if there's no like formal training on this within their organizations, like what would your recommendation be for them?
Well, to do that, you've almost got to go back and collect a tool, right? Because the biggest challenge you have as a manager at the moment is prioritization of task. And what the skill I'd get better at learning first. So the skill I'd learn and get better at first is saying no. You've got to learn to push back on the people above you and say, this is not high priority at the moment, or here's everything I'm doing at the moment. If I take this task on, which one of these is expendable for me to now do that task? And it's a skill that used to be really prevalent that we've lost now is managers managing up. And once you've cleared your plate and you've got the time to then do that, I'd recommend trying as hard as you can to train yourself on coaching. I'd recommend reading Miles Downey, who's got several books, Becoming an Effective Coach. He's got a new book out at the moment, which is Coach, Manage, Lead, which basically breaks down the fundamental three parts of management, which is coaching, managing, leading. And I'd try and train myself how to coach. And on top of that, I'd get myself a coach as well, because then you can see the behavior being modeled through your coaching yourself. And then the last part, which is super important, is that recognize you're going to be really, really, really shit at coaching for the first year. That doesn't mean you should give up. You're going to be clunky. You're going to be uncomfortable. You're going to find it hard. It's going to be painful. Your rep's going to be going, why are you asking me all these questions? But that's okay. It doesn't mean you give up. You keep going, you keep going, keep going until you get better at it. Like anything, you got to keep doing it until it becomes a real conscious competency.
Love that. Aaron, I have to ask, do you coach in your household when you have conversations with your wife and what is it, your son?
My daughter, yeah, no, she coaches me actually. She's often, coaching me down off a ledge somewhere. But no, yeah, I mean, it's interesting you asked actually, Malvina, because one of the most sort of easy, quick wins is to coach your friends and family and just get used to asking it in conversation. But yeah, me and my colleague Raf, he's got two children. He's the co-founder of our business as well, and his kids are a little bit older than mine, but he coaches his children, and it's just amazing, like how you can start shaping a young mind by using these coaching practices. And I definitely am going to do it with my daughter. She's only 2 at the moment, so coaching is often greeted with crying and her throwing something at me and saying no until I stop, basically. So yeah, I'm definitely going to do it with my daughter as well. How about you? Do you guys coach your children?
My daughter's 3. My son is 7. It's challenging, right? Like these little beings, they want the answers, they ask for Frozen. I'm not going to say, well, what is it exactly about Elsa that, piques your interest?
Yeah. When you put it in that context, it does become interesting.
Yeah. Well, I don't, so I just have Bobby, my dog, and can't really coach. I mean, I do try and coach him, but it's a one-way dialogue.
Yeah, sure.
Awesome. Well, Aaron, thank you so much for coming on the Enablement Brew. This was an incredible conversation.
Yeah.
And of course, if anyone wants to get in touch with you, right, you're all over your LinkedIn. Celebrity content crush. But thank you so much for coming on, and we'll see you guys next time.
Thank you. Bye.